Are you sure?
Here's the 30-second lesson on what legends know. Never ask a bride why she's getting married. Don't wear a skirt on a windy day. Deodorant is not a shower. Don't sniff chili flakes. And don't forget, saving is not investing. Legends don't just save, they invest in mutual funds. Mutual fund investments are subject to market risks. Read all scheme-related documents carefully.
Ajit Doval, as we know, has been appointed National Security Advisor for a third term, for an unprecedented third term. Now, Ajit Doval has had a storied life. There is a lot written about him, a lot of it accurate, a lot of it mythological. There are myths built around him. We've also featured him in 2 earlier episodes of Cut The Clutter, of which I'm sharing the links with you. Check out the links under the description. So I will not go into any of that again. As I said in one of those links, that in some ways my professional life has run sort of parallelly with his professional life. I'm a bit younger, or he's a bit older than me. He's a bit senior to me. But you know what happens? That we journalists, reporters tend to interact with people older than us or people much more senior to us in government services because they are the ones who are generating the news. So that said, please check out those 2 links for more details on him and his life as a professional intelligence person through his life. However, last 10 years and now going ahead in this term, because his appointment is coterminous with the Prime Minister or as ordered, whichever is earlier. So he is actually an essential part of Prime Minister Modi's entourage. That said, this is a very different role from just being the intelligence chief or the intelligence bureau chief or running operations at the intelligence bureau. Before that, by the way, he was appointed intelligence bureau chief, IB chief, by the UPA government, by Dr. Manmohan Singh's UPA government. That's a fact we should not forget, because he had had an excellent relationship with all the governments he had worked with in the past. Vajpayee government, Manmohan Singh government, before that the Indira Gandhi government. He was among the younger people also involved in the entire operation which led to the merger of Sikkim with India. 1974-75, that was a tumultuous period in India's history. Finally, it led to the emergency, but before that, the year before that, India had seen a lot of dramatic developments also on the national security front. Remember, in 1974, it was that India tested the nukes for the first time. India called it a peaceful nuclear explosion, but that was 1974. Also called Pokhran 1 or Buddha Smiling 1 test. That said, because we have already said, written and spoken so much about Ajit Doval, I will also share a national interest article on him that I wrote in 2016. All that done, let's focus today on the post of National Security Advisor. In fact, so understated is this post that the 25th anniversary of the founding of the position just passed sort of unknown to anybody. Now we are in the 26th year of the position of the National Security Advisor. India became independent in 1947. The NSA position was only set up in 1998. It took that long for that position to come up. 51 years. That's because India was decade upon decade upon decade. India was beginning to figure out its external and internal security needs, and in the course of time also figured that the internal security and external security, first of all, the first lesson for India was that internal security and external security are 2 different things. The next thing India learned was that foreign policy, strategic policy and external intelligence were also linked. They were not that far apart. And finally, a realization came as India's threat perceptions grew. Somehow, India was always behind the curve on this. A country like India in such a hostile environment, inheriting a history of war. After all, our birth, the first war came with our birth, 1947, 1948. We had a war over Kashmir with Pakistan, 1962. There was another full-fledged war with China. 1960 was the liberation of Goa. 1965 was another full-fledged war with China. Before that, the Kutch conflict, or a series of skirmishes there. After that, the Nathula skirmish with the Chinese in 1967. Then the war with Pakistan in 1971. The Cold War coming into the subcontinent. Americans making Pakistanis their ally, with Pakistan signing up to their treaties. India getting close to the Soviet Union and ending the 1960s by signing the Indo-Soviet Treaty of Peace, Friendship and Cooperation. After that, the Bangladesh War, Shimla Agreement, 1974, the nuclear test. So India's security needs were always intense. And that's why it's surprising that it took India more than half a century, just a bit more than half a century, to realize that it needed a position located in the Prime Minister's office, working closely with the Prime Minister, and in that position would then come all the inputs on internal security, external security or internal intelligence and external intelligence, and also the foreign policy plans and formulations, because ultimately foreign policy, security policy is made politically. Prime Minister of India heads that process. While inputs come from the field, from the various ministries and departments, intelligence, etc., to the Prime Minister, the policy decisions have to come down and the policy objectives have to come down from the Prime Minister for execution. So there was need felt for such a position that will distill all the information that's coming in to the Prime Minister, so that the Prime Minister has the right inputs, also get the Prime Minister's mind, advise the Prime Minister and help the Prime Minister formulate policies and then ensure their implementation. That's how this position was created in 1998 by Atal Bihari Vajpayee. That is how the first NSA was appointed. However, since we have an opportunity today to review and to look at and to try and understand how this process grew and what kind of changes it went through as it evolved, we have to remember that the first incumbent, Brajesh Mishra, he was a former Indian Foreign Service officer. He was appointed India's first National Security Advisor or NSA in 1998 by the Vajpayee government, and his job was defined as being the primary advisor to the Prime Minister, both on internal security and external policies as well, external security as well as foreign policy as well. Now, he did not have just one job. He was also simultaneously given the job of Principal Secretary to Prime Minister of India. Now, see the two appointments that the Prime Minister has now decided to continue in his third term. One is the National Security Advisor. Second is P.K. Mishra, who is the Principal Secretary to Prime Minister. Both appointments now are in the rank of full cabinet ministers, right? Both these jobs were combined in one position by Atal Bihari Vajpayee in 1998 under Brajesh Mishra. So he was the first NSA cum Principal Secretary from 1998 to 2004 until Vajpayee lost power. Then Manmohan Singh government was sworn in, and the interesting thing the Manmohan Singh government did was they thought that NSA was too powerful a position. Possibly it was also a reaction or a response to the fact that Brajesh Mishra was seen to be so close to Prime Minister Vajpayee. It had drawn adverse comments in public. Adverse comments in public from the RSS then, there was a lot of criticism. So maybe reacting or responding to the idea that the position had become too powerful and probably not thinking that the position became too powerful. One, because it was a dual position, it also combined the Principal Secretary's position, Principal Secretary to Prime Minister, and also because Brajesh Mishra and Atal Bihari Vajpayee enjoyed a very close personal relationship. Nevertheless, the UPA government decided to split the post. So they decided to have two NSAs. So first of all, India did not have an NSA for 51 years, and now that we had an NSA, we decided to have two NSAs. What's better than having one NSA? Have two NSAs. So two NSAs, one was taken from Indian Police Service, IPS, that is M.K. Narayanan, who had been Director of Intelligence Bureau and again had a storied career. In fact, for many years, he was the boss that Ajit Doval reported to. Sometimes, remember M from Ian Fleming novels? He was the boss who kept James Bond on the narrow and the straight, if anybody could keep, or to the extent anybody could keep James Bond on the narrow and the straight. Nevertheless, this job was split. So M.K. Narayanan was brought in to keep an eye on internal security and advise the Prime Minister. J.N. Dikshit, known as Mani Dikshit, wrote many books. J.N. Dikshit was brought in from Indian Foreign Service. He'd been ambassador to many important countries, including Sri Lanka and Pakistan, India's neighborhood in very difficult times, very eventful times. Wonderful scholar, great mind, as M.K. Narayanan is. You should read his column in The Hindu. It's a wonderful column and he comes in with a great depth of knowledge. So these two then became the duo that ran the National Security Advisor's office. Two National Security Advisors. 3rd of January 2005, unfortunately, less than a year into the job, J.N. Dikshit passed away. He died in his sleep, had a heart attack and passed away. When that happened, Manmohan Singh government also decided not to replace him with another foreign service officer or another officer to look at external inputs, to advise the Prime Minister on external issues or external securities. Then once again the UPA combined the office. They collapsed the office again under one NSA. So M.K. Narayanan then became India's sole NSA and served in that position for more than 5 years. After M.K. Narayanan, the position went, again UPA came back to power in 2009. About a year later, M.K. Narayanan left and the position now went to Shiv Shankar Menon. Shiv Shankar Menon of the Foreign Service, former Foreign Secretary, High Commissioner to Pakistan, Ambassador to China, Ambassador to High Commissioner to Sri Lanka, with many important positions across the world, with great deal of experience, also a scholarly mind. So he had this job under UPA 2. After UPA 2, Narendra Modi government, because Ajit Doval had also been a fellow traveller with the opposition group, with the BJP group. He had been involved with Vivekanand Foundation, producing some academic work and also some line of thinking that the new government, the BJP government, might follow. He got this position. He has grown in this position. It is in this position that he was designated cabinet minister, as also was principal secretary to Prime Minister. So important is his role considered, and so trusted is he by the Prime Minister that at the age of 79, he's again been given a fresh appointment. This fresh appointment has given us an excuse also to look at the evolution of India's thought on the higher national security management. From 1950, India became independent. In 1947, India had inherited the Intelligence Bureau from the British, and the Intelligence Bureau chief then was an officer of IP, as it was called. That was the Indian Imperial Police. Obviously, India became independent, so Imperial was dropped. It became Indian Police. So the first IB director was T.G. Sanjeevi Pillai. Intelligence Bureau now looked at all intelligence, internal as well as external. He was succeeded by B.N. Malik. So B.N. Malik, 1950. B.N. Malik was somebody who Nehru knew well. He became very powerful. As I told you earlier, IB at this point, Intelligence Bureau, looked at both internal as well as external intelligence. So this was the National Intelligence Czar, also worked very closely with the Prime Minister, so effectively performed the role of the National Security Advisor. How long did he serve in that job? He took over in 1950, served in that position in an all-powerful manner for more than 14 years. He demitted office on 9th of October 1964, just months after Jawaharlal Nehru passed away on 27th of May in the same year. So in a way, his position was also coterminous with that of Jawaharlal Nehru. Now, his era saw a lot of action. I told you 1962 war, the liberation of Goa, all of the tamasha that went on leading up to the war in 1962, and the build-up in Kashmir with Hazrat Bal, etc., Hazrat Bal incident, etc. So he had seen a very action-packed time. He had also seen the evolution of Indian intelligence. So in some ways, he was the original spy master, although he was blamed many times and repeatedly in history, sometimes rightly, sometimes based on folklore, for India's intelligence failure, or what was seen as India's intelligence failure in the 1962 war. However, India's failure in 1962 was more political. It was mostly political. then military as well as that of intelligence. B.N. Malik was also one of those scholarly old generation police officers. He wrote his autobiography, his memoirs in 3 volumes. And in college, I found all 3 volumes in the library, and I read all of them then, and you can still refer to them if you can find them. They are wonderful pieces of writing. So the 3 volumes are My Years with Nehru, one, The Chinese Betrayal, about 1962. Number 2, Kashmir, that is the whole gamut of talks with Kashmiris, behind the scenes, all the shenanigans with Sheikh Abdullah and the rest. So first is The Chinese Betrayal, second volume Kashmir, and third volume just called 1948 to 1964. I also had the privilege of getting to know him much later in the mid 80s when I used to work for India Today, and I would go to his home and he was very happy. He was then living with his son-in-law, that is Hari Anand Barari, who was then director of Intelligence Bureau 1984 to 1987, and generally I would put up my motorbike and walk into the house, and Mr. B.N. Malik would be there sitting in his garden in the winter in a golf cap, full of stories. He was a wonderful raconteur. So for 14 years, he sat in a position which would today be called National Security Advisor. However, the setback against China and also the limitations of Indian intelligence shown up in 1965. He wasn't heading the Intelligence Bureau then. He had retired, as I told you, on 9th of October 1964. Now Mr. S.P. Verma was heading Intelligence Bureau. So once again, some inadequacies were seen. For example, first of all, there was the inability of Indian intelligence to foresee Operation Gibraltar, with the Pakistanis launched in Kashmir Valley by bringing in thousands of infiltrators. The fact that they trained them over time, planned, and then sent them in, Indian intelligence had failed to sniff that out. So that gave India the impression that India was weak on external intelligence, that one office, that is Intelligence Bureau, was overburdened looking at internal as well as external intelligence. Also remember, this was the time when America had become a hostile power. India was seeing FBI and CIA, for example, working separately. Indian officers, Indian leaders were getting exposed to other countries, particularly in the Western world. So the idea now was to split the jobs and create another office. It took some time. Mrs. Gandhi came to power in 1966. It took her a couple of years. In 1968, she founded RAW, that is Research and Analysis Wing, as a separate external intelligence agency. Now there were 2 agencies, Intelligence Bureau, Research and Analysis Wing, but there was no office where both could input their findings, and that office would then distill them and take them to the Prime Minister. That still took some time evolving. Person Mrs. Gandhi appointed as Raw Chief, R.N. Kao, Ramnath Kao, again a storied life. He lasted in that job for 9 years. He actually should have retired in 1976 when he turned 58, which was the retirement age then. She gave him an extension, so he served till 1977, would probably have gone on serving, but for the fact that Mrs. Gandhi lost power in 1977 after the emergency. In so many ways, of course he was the founder of RAW, but in so many ways, he was also the founder of modern Indian external intelligence, because he ran operations leading up to the 71 war, about which books have been written, and then we know Pokhran 1, etc. Many things happened under his watch. The merger of Sikkim happened under his watch, and also a very good cadre of Indian intelligence officers got trained under his watch. That's the important thing to watch. When B.N. Malik took over as Intelligence Bureau Director in 1950, he also brought in a young officer with him at that point, that is R.N. Kao. R.N. Kao was 1940 batch IP officer. He had only been in service for 10 years then. He was brought in to look after personal security for Jawaharlal Nehru. In the process, he also developed a close relationship of trust with Jawaharlal Nehru, and that's why Jawaharlal Nehru it was who appointed him as the head of what was called and is still called ARC, Aviation Research Center. It was based at Charbatiya in Odisha. It worked closely with the CIA. It worked closely with the CIA in the early 60s, not later. And it worked with the CIA to run operations or to run overflights over Tibet to collect technical intelligence. ARC still does a lot of that work. It was, you can say that, you can pretty much say that R.N. Kao was its founders, and maybe that research in RAW, Research and Analysis Wing, has also come from ARC, Aviation Research Center. Aviation Research Center, ARC, is now a part of RAW. So, important thing, I'm sure you have noted by now, but if you haven't, R.N. Kao, he took over as the head of RAW in 1968. He was born in 1918, right? Which means he took over as the head of RAW at the age of 15. That's how young these leaders were in that era. But he wasn't done yet, right? He had to go out as Morarji Desai became Prime Minister. He was very suspicious of RAW and intelligence work. So R.N. Kao went out of the system, but soon enough Mrs. Gandhi was back, and he was back in the system also. Mrs. Gandhi was not going to be working without him. So he came in as a kind of advisor, foreign policy / security advisor to Mrs. Gandhi, and continued on in that position with Rajiv Gandhi as well. By the way, he passed away in January 2002 at the age of 84. So he worked closely with both of them, and that in a way was the precursor to the position of National Security Advisor. After Rajiv Gandhi, as we know, India had many unstable governments. So national security issues, they were always threats to national security, but many of those issues were immediate and tactical. Narasimha Rao, for example, had an unbroken 5-year stint, but in his time, there was a big insurgency in Punjab and in Kashmir. So he was so busy fighting that the larger thought process on national security management took the back seat. And that's why it had to wait for Atal Bihari Vajpayee to come in, because that group had been out of power for a very long time. And when you're out of power, you have more time to think, plan. It also had fine minds like, say, Jaswant Singh, Brajesh Mishra, and they were also more exposed to the Western ways of working. By this time, India had also begun to work much more closely with America. That started in the era of Narasimha Rao. So as Indians were dealing again and again with US presidents, with the US NSAs, the idea that India should have an NSA as well, that took ground. And that's how this position came up. And then you've seen the evolution of the position. We've described that to you. And then the position evolved from 1 is to 2, back into 1, right? And we've described it to you how this process took place and why. The important thing, one takeaway before I let you go, is that if you see the incumbents in this position, Brajesh Mishra, J.N. Dikshit, M.K. Narayanan, Shiv Shankar Menon, Ajit Kumar Doval. Ajit Kumar Doval, Ajit Kumar Doval, Ajit Kumar Doval. 3 terms. In fact, at the end of this term, Ajit Kumar Doval would have held this position longer than B.N. Malik had the position of the Director of Intelligence Bureau, where he combined all these functions. The important thing is, this position has been held by Indian Foreign Service officers, Indian Police Service officers, but has never been held by an IAS officer. In fact, beginning 1998, when it became a much wider, larger position, Indian Foreign Service has made it to it. But the fact is that this is one fortress that IAS has failed to break. I thought that's an interesting sidelight to this.